Okay, guys, we're on our second to last EdPuzzle, and this week I'm going to make it short and sweet, hopefully, because you've got a lot of work to do. And so essentially what we're going to go over in the EdPuzzle is the expectations for this week. So we're submitting your revised research proposal. So I want to entail exactly what you need to do to complete that, and that's going to be essentially a two-step process. And then we'll look at the grading rubric and the materials that we have available on Canvas for you to use as you're going through and revising your research proposal. So the IRB application last week was pretty simple, and so you should expect to have to commit more time this week for this revised proposal than you did last week. How much time this assignment takes you is going to depend entirely on how good your literature review was that you started with and how much work you had to do on that. Everyone's new sections looked pretty good, and that was a result of all the hard work you put in to those discussion boards and the revisions that we already worked through together. And so now all the major changes that need to occur are to the writing and the introduction and the new sections, and then any lingering errors and formatting and stuff, which are pretty easy to change. So let's talk about this two-step process for revision. So the first thing you'll notice is that everyone has gotten their research proposal back. In your grade feedback for the original research proposal that you submitted, I've attached an explanation and then two documents. One document is your proposal with compiled revisions, and the file name is named just that. And then you also have your graded rubric with additional comments. So what your proposal with compiled revisions has are track changes and comments from one of your peer reviewers and I only passed along the best peer review essentially because I didn't want to overwhelm you with opinions and comments from 3 different people on one document during one round. And so you've got track changes and comments from both one of your peer reviewers and I on this document. And so that's the document that you will be working with to revise. So what you want to do first off is go ahead and download that document and change the file name. You need to submit it with the file name of your last name _ revised proposal. So just as we had file name requirements for the peer reviews, you have a file name requirement for this revised proposal, and there's a reason for that. If you save it as the same file name as your original proposal, or you save it as the same file name as the compiled revisions that I sent you back, Canvas gets confused. And so if it has duplicate file names within the system for your course, sometimes it can revert to old versions, or you can lose changes or something of that nature. And so first, most important thing to do is when you start working on it, and definitely before you submit it, you need to make sure that it's got a smart file name on it, being your last name _ revised proposal, to avoid any errors that can occur in Canvas. So the first general step of this revision process is to go through all of our track changes and all of our comments. And so depending on what your settings are in your Microsoft Word, when you open it up, it might look overwhelming. There might be comments everywhere. There might be track changes everywhere. Or your Word might be set so that you're only showing simple markup and you can't really see all of our comments and changes, and it might not look like much. And so there are instructions in Canvas for how to process the track changes and comments. It'll take you through essentially a step A, which is turning on the track changes so you can see them, and then accepting them one by one to see what we changed. And then B, after you've done all the track changes, is to go back and read the comments and address them one by one, and then delete each comment after you've addressed it. So after you do all of that, and you do it correctly using the instructions, your paper is going to end up looking back to normal. It's not going to have any track changes on it, and it's not going to have any comments remaining, or rather, it shouldn't. If it does, that's one of the requirements for this assignment, that you do that correctly, as we will see on the rubric. And so you need to make sure that you follow those instructions in Canvas closely, and it's really not that hard to do. If the instructions on Canvas look slightly different than your version of Word, then you simply just need to Google your version of Word to find out where these menu options and things are. It looks slightly different on older versions, and it also looks slightly different on Apple versions. So first step is to deal with our track changes and comments. And again, you can download and print those out, which I recommend in the Canvas module. They became available last week so that you get a head start on this if you wanted. The second step is proofing your writing. And so I have these separated, and I'm describing them as 2 steps because these need to be done separately. Do not try to go through your paper, accept our track changes, address the comments, proofread your paper, quote unquote, proofread your paper, and then submit your final revised proposal. I'm not really asking you to proofread when we talk about proofing your writing. We're not correcting typos and errors, although we're not just correcting typos and errors. Rather, what you're doing is you're going through and you're rewriting some of your own writing to make it more efficient, to increase clarity, and to make your writing better. No one writes well the first time. The best writers are really the best editors. And so a really good paper or any of the articles that you read or the textbooks you read, they've been rewritten essentially over and over again to increase the writing. So we got to start somewhere and then make it better. And so that's what I mean by this proofing your writing step 2. So the first thing to do is that you do want to go through and proofread for typos and odd spacing and stuff like that. When we are going through and doing track changes and comments, especially when we're going through and there's already track changes from someone else on there, it's somewhat hard to see what the actual text is going to look like. And so there's remnants from that oftentimes in the form of typos. And so there might be like 3 spaces somewhere, or someone might have accidentally deleted your period. And this won't be common, but it's definitely possible after you accept all the track changes that something in a track change will have accidentally manifested into a typo or an obvious error. And so you want to go through and just fix any of the odds and ends that ended up as a result of all of the track changes that we did to your document. And so that's just an easy read through. Then you need to go through and proof your own writing by making revisions to increase the clarity and improve the writing mechanics of your writing. And so I have a lot of materials in Canvas that you can use to do this. I'm not going to lecture on all of them because it's going to take up a lot of time, and I'd rather you just use those materials on your own and go through this idea of rewriting, essentially. And again, most of this rewriting needs to happen in the introductions for the literature review. So the things that I will want you to work on that you will find in Canvas, and I'll show you in a second, are basic things like repetition and parallel structure, simple and direct writing, which I'll explain in just a minute, and then grammar mechanics like commas and basic sentence structure. So how will I know if you've proofed your writing? Well, I'm checking, and so that's why I'm emphasizing it so much, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your revision with your proposal with compiled revisions, and I'm going to, on my own, accept all the track changes and delete all the comments. I'm then going to compare that document with the revised proposal that you submit. And what that's going to do through a comparison of Microsoft Word is show me everything that you changed after you accepted all the track changes and addressed all of our comments. So it's essentially going to show me all of the proofing and the rewriting that you did on your own after that fact. And as we'll see on the rubric, that proofing is worth a lot of points. And so just want you to be aware that I'm going to be looking for the proofing, that I have a really easy way to detect it, and that's a major criteria for this assignment. So when we talk about proofing your writing, we have some material in Canvas for you to, make sure that you're using commas correctly and not having comma splices run on sentences, not using commas unnecessarily, and things of that nature. Simple grammar mechanics. But at least 2 or 3 of the pages have to do with writing style. And so when we think about writing style, a lot of these things are going to come back to kind of the purpose of scientific writing in the first place. And so it's important to understand that before we go through and use all of these materials to kind of frame our head around what I want and why I want it. So the point of scientific writing, which is what this research proposal is, and is what a literature review is to efficiently convey information, okay? So your audience or your readers come to a paper like this to get information as quickly as possible. You don't go to one of your textbooks in your courses for light pleasure reading, right? You don't read any of these empirical articles on research because it's fun. Rather, you go there for specific information and for a specific purpose. If you could, if I could say something in one paragraph instead of 4 paragraphs, you as a student would prefer to read the 1 paragraph versus the 4 paragraphs and save the time, wouldn't you? You want to get the information and get out. And so that's the point of scientific writing. We don't want to waste people's time. We want to make sure that they're getting the information they came for, that it's clear, it's simple and direct, and it's as short as possible. And so a lot of times in different types of writing, we write in such a way that makes it, quote, sound more interesting. Or we write in such a way that it might take your reader down some different literary paths. Maybe we want to surprise them. Maybe we want to throw in a lot of metaphors in there to really get them thinking about certain things. But that's not the case for scientific writing. That's not why people come to these papers. We don't want to lead them down paths and create confusion. We don't want to pose metaphors and give their brain extra work to do to understand the information being presented. We don't want to create these overly complex sentences that make something sound really interesting and different and constantly be changing up the vocabulary and the sentence structure we're using just to what we think make it sound more interesting. We call this fluffy writing, and it's great for English and literature and creative writing and stuff like that. But it really sucks for scientific writing because all it does is it makes it so that it takes your reader at least twice as long to get through what they're trying to read. And so we want to get rid of all of this fluff. We want to spit things out, say it once, say it clear and directly, and move on so that your reader can get through your paper, get through the article, get the information as quickly as they can, and then get out. And so a lot of the stuff we're going to be looking at are ways to defluff your writing. And many of these papers were what I would call fluffy. They were written to sound interesting or to sound articulate without really keeping the main focus of the efficiency of the writing in mind. So all these worksheets are available in Canvas. You can download the worksheets themselves and print them out, which I recommend, and then you can also just view them in the Canvas page. So what I want to do really quick is just look at the worksheets that are actually in Canvas to show you what I'm talking about, and then you guys can work with these on your own. I'm not going to lecture on them or anything. So writing simply or directly. So this is one of the worksheets. Again, we want to avoid fluffy writing. So you want to opt for a simpler word if one is available. For these types of papers, we want it to be approachable for a big audience, okay? I don't want someone to have to be a college graduate to be able to understand my paper. That doesn't make me smarter or make me a better writer. It's actually much harder to write in a way that more people can understand versus less. And so if there's a simpler word, you want to opt for the simplest word versus an overly complex vocabulary. You also want to omit needless words. And so when you read through a sentence, if there are extra words that you can take out, or there's a long phrase that you could just simply say in one word, you always want to opt for the one-word choice and for getting rid of extra words. In scientific writing, there really isn't often a need for things like adjectives where we describe the way that someone's doing a verb. We wouldn't say they've excitedly collected data or anything like that. And so that's the kind of stuff we want to get rid of. So you can read through these examples on your own to see what I'm talking about. So again, it takes someone about half the time to read a short sentence that it does one of these long sentences. And as long as they're getting the same information out of it, there's no need to make the sentence unnecessarily long and waste their time. Another big one on these literature reviews is writing in the active voice. And every single one of you has comments on your paper about writing in the active voice. For whatever reason, when we're talking about research that happened in the past and we're trying to sound smart when we write these papers, we end up writing in the passive voice. So research has been conducted. would be the passive voice. What happens in the passive voice is that we take the subject out of the sentence or we hide it at the end. And so it decreases clarity of the sentence. And so to look at an example here, say passive voice, and so you'll notice it's a lot in your papers, that participants were interviewed in an isolated room while being videotaped. Well, ask yourself, who's the subject here? Participants? No, they're not actually the subject of the sentence. And so since we've situated them at the beginning of the sentence, even though they're not actually the subject, makes the sentence less clear for readers, and it makes them do a little extra mental work to infer what's going on. So what you want to do is you want to find the action or the verb of your sentence. The verb here is interviewed, right? So looking through the sentence, the verb is interviewed. Who is doing the interviewing? Well, participants aren't doing the interviews. They're actually the ones being interviewed. They're the object of the sentence. Researchers are the subject here because they're committing the action. And in this passive voice, we've completely eliminated them from the sentence. And so to rewrite in the active voice, you want to find what the action is, interviewed and videotaped. And then you want to make sure the subject who's doing that action ends up at the beginning of the sentence as the subject actively doing the action. So there's other examples of this. And so this is an easy one to look out for as you're reading through your paper. And once you start to notice it, you'll notice it more and more often. And you'll see how frequent it is in these papers that we write for whatever reason when we are writing about research that happened in the past. And so I want you to get away from this feeling that all sentences have to sound different or have to be structured differently. Your writing only sounds redundant to you. And so we'll get, let's go talk about parallel writing now. Your sentences and your paragraphs and your writing only sound redundant to you because you're reading it over and over and over and over again. As a reader, it's actually easier when sentences are structured the same or when we use parallelism or repetition to structure sentences that are conveying similar information in similar ways. It doesn't sound redundant to your reader. You don't want to swap out words for synonyms because you feel like you've used a word too many times. When you swap out a word for a synonym, your reader assumes that you're referring to something else. Otherwise, why would you have swapped the word out? Again, this isn't creative writing. It's just to get the information across. And so we want to avoid trying to mix up our sentences that they sound different or mix up our words or vocabulary so it sounds different to keep things interesting. In this field, interesting is another word for convoluted when it comes to writing style. So we discussed this on this handout about avoiding synonyms and changing sentence structure, and you can see these examples here. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them. So both of these have to do with just making your writing efficient, increasing clarity, and they really come back down to this main point of scientific writing, which is efficiently conveying information. These last two are more grammar-based, and so I'll let you go through those on your own. It's just really reminders about how you should be using commas, where they go, and how you connect clauses and sentence structures together to avoid things like run-ons and incomplete sentences and comma splices and things of that nature. So those are all the materials that you're expected to use when you go through the paper on your own to rewrite and improve the writing. So here's the grading rubric that I'm using to go through your research proposal this week. You'll notice that all of this first stuff up here, that's the exact same criteria as your research proposal in the first place. And so what you can do is you can go back to your graded rubric that I attached with your research proposal, and you can look to see where you lost points and where there are comments on the side, and make sure that you've fixed all those so that you get those points back. The points that are allocated to each of these sections is actually lesser than it was in the original one, since the original research proposal was worth 40 points, and now I'm fitting in extra criteria down here. But they're still the same kind of proportional-wise when it comes to grading. So you can make sure you get full credit on these just by going through your original grading rubric and making sure that you address any comments or point deductions in the first round. Now you'll see the new criteria for this one is that 14 points go through this this revision and proofing process. And so 4 points are allocated just simply by correctly accepting the track changes and addressing the comments. And so just using that handout for how to go through track changes and making sure that's all done correctly and that none of that remain on your document when you submit it, your final draft, is worth 4 points. And then we have 10 points here for this additional rewriting and proofing on your own. So that's the difference I'm going to look at between your paper with all the revisions and track changes accepted and the one that you finally turned in, because I want to see evidence that you went through and try to increase the efficiency and the clarity of your writing by getting rid of words, making sure your grammar is correct, making sure that you're writing simply and directly and in the active voice and things of that nature. And so that's it for the EdPuzzle this week. You can go ahead and ask me any questions you have as you're going along. But next week, it's just your proposal, and so your research presentation. And so you're very, very close to the end of this class, and this is the last big hump you have to go get over when it comes to writing a paper for your undergraduate degree.